Hello, and welcome to the Watcher's review of Warriors of the Deep. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you can be alerted to more content. The Doctor, Tegan and Turlough land on a sea base in the late 21st century in the midst of a Cold War standoff between two human factions. Meanwhile, the Silurians plan to wake their Sea Devil cousins from hibernation and take over the sea base and use it to trigger a nuclear war to wipe out humanity so they can reclaim the Earth. With Warriors of the Deep, Peter Davison was heading into his third and final season as the Doctor, but it is interesting that he is still trying out new ideas with the persona. Due to the youthful nature of the fifth incarnation of the Time Lord, Peter Davidson's approach was always full of running and fast talking, all the while by not being intentionally violent to others, leading to an air of vulnerability, while plenty of violence took place around him. In Warriors of the Deep, the athleticism is still there, while this time the Doctor tends to get a bit more stuck into the violence, albeit with honourable intentions. Two particular scenes are the build-up to episode 1, where he gets himself into an altercation with two armed guards in order to allow Turlough and Tegan to escape, but himself gets thrown into a pool. He later prevents himself and Tegan getting shot by blinding another character with a strong UV light. Due to falling into a pool, the Doctor spends the majority of the story in a gas suit as worn by the guards, which he takes from an unconscious guard he found. During the scene, he ventures briefly into a bit of comedy, questioning what the guard has been eating due to the odour of the suit, with Tegan also making the same observation. Somewhat uncharacteristic of the Fifth Doctor, this feels like a throwback to the Fourth Doctor era, when Douglas Adams was editing the script. Upon coming across the Silurians and the Sea Devils later on in the story, the Doctor harks back to the pacifist tendencies of his third incarnation when attempting to mediate peace between them and the humans, which is fitting, given that the Silurian and Sea Devils last appeared during the Third Doctor era. This is all brief though, given the Silurians' hell-bent nature of succeeding, and although the Doctor continues to highlight the waste of life war brings, he reluctantly agrees to use gruesome methods as the only means to stop the Silurians and Sea Devils from starting a nuclear war. Like Peter Davison, actress Janet Fielding was also coming into her final season playing companion Tegan Javanka. The choice of time zone for the TARDIS crew is decided due to the Doctor's promise of showing Tegan some more of Earth's future. Normally, Tegan is very outspoken, feisty and direct in character, with her even describing herself in the past as a mouth on legs. However, here her character is strangely reserved and quiet, and her main interaction in the story is being at the centre of the climax of episode 2, when trapped under a metal door and at the mercy of the Silurian's pet, the Merker. This puts her in a rare damsel in distress scenario which isn't like her character, and the resulting conclusion to the scene leaves her with an injured ankle, and as such is left with a lot of waiting and hiding in corridors of the sea base. Tegan is a companion that you either love or hate, but here she is written uncharacteristically, and is unusually reserved, which is unfortunate given any opportunities in this story to flourish her typical character outbursts. Turlough had now spent nearly the equivalent of a whole season on the show, and forever remains an interesting concept and character given that his introduction to the show was to kill the Doctor off on behalf of the Black Guardian. Although by the time we have reached Warriors of the Deep, he has made it clear his desire to travel and learn from the Doctor in a similar manner to Adric, the Doctor still doesn't seem to fully trust him. Flippant and rash in his decision-making, despite his intelligence, he is quick to dismiss the Doctor as having drowned at the end of episode 1 when he falls into the pool. Despite this, he shows a great deal of concern and care for the well-being of Tegan, and willing to go to great lengths to help her and the Doctor out of compromising situations, in particular involving the oncoming Merker. For the second half of the story though, he is merely reduced to taking up arms and fighting alongside the crew of the sea base, in holding off the approach of the Silurians and the Sea Devils. Like Tegan, this isn't a strong story for Turlough, and on the whole you could argue that Warriors of the Deep isn't the strongest story for a companion anyway. The Silurians and the Sea Devils were both making just their second appearance in Doctor Who, having both debuted during the Third Doctor era. This is the first and only time in the classic series that they appear together. Given the clear allusion to them being genetically related and the similar narrative threads in their own previously respected storylines, it seems like a natural idea to have them appearing side by side in this story. With that in mind, one of them wouldn't work without the other, as the Sea Devils are aquatic-based creatures, but lack the individual characteristics of their reptilian cousins the Silurians, and are more strongly represented as a combined unit of force. The Silurians are more strategic, and carry out the majority of the dialogue and come across as the more advanced of the two species. However, their origins are more land-based, and it is therefore natural that they revive the Sea Devils and act somewhat as generals while the Sea Devils act as foot soldiers. This is further highlighted given that the Sea Devils, in comparison to the ones in the last appearance, are wearing samurai-style combat outfits as opposed to the netting costumes from their debut story. This is explained as this group of Sea Devils are identified as a warrior class trained for combat. Out of the three Silurians, they have a lead named Ithkar, who is later revealed to be one of the triad of the Silurian scientists the Doctor came across in his third incarnation. Once the Doctor proves who he is, Ithkar is willing to show compassion and let the Doctor and his companions live and leave once their plans succeeded, as recognition for his efforts in the past, which acts as a means to outline that although they oppose human occupation of Earth, they aren't as malevolent as other antagonists in the show's history have been. With the story mainly involving the Silurians and the Sea Devils infiltrating and then attacking the sea base, they bring along a secret weapon with them in the form of their pet sea creature, the Merker, which is given a great build-up, only to greatly disappoint upon entry due to the budget and time limitations, and looks like a reptilian pantomime horse. Thankfully, its screen time is greatly reduced. There are a whole host of guest characters in Warriors of the Deep representing the crew of the sea base, including Commander Vorshak, who gives off this heroic last man standing vibe, Officers Bullock and Preston, the seconded student Maddox, as well as the traitors Nielsen and Solo, who carry their own subplot working for the unseen human enemy in the story. Unfortunately, all these characters are either lacking in depth or carry stereotypical personas, and as such when they are killed off, you don't feel much detachment or sadness for them in the story. Warriors of the Deep was written by Johnny Byrne, who is making his third and final writing contribution to Doctor Who. Like his previous two offerings, The Keeper of Traken and Arc of Infinity, he uses an antagonist who is already featured in the show and created by another writer. In this case, both the Silurians and Sea Devils' previous appearance were written by Malcolm Hulke, who had died 4 years before Warriors of the Deep was broadcasted. Therefore, I can only imagine producer John Nathan Turner and script editor Eric Saywood saw Johnny Byrne as a writer capable of reintroducing Hulke's creations and to keep in line with their original ideologies, as well as adding more narrative to them. To be fair to Johnny Byrne, he does just that, and he channels the writing style of Malcolm Hulke by using relevant real-world issues coupled with protagonists making fateful errors and antagonists being misunderstood or acting out of self-defense. A clear real-world theme is the Cold War and nuclear threat, which seemed very real during the mid-1980s when this story was broadcasted. The background of the narrative circulates around the crew of the sea base being on standby or going to war with an unseen opposing bloc, which is an obvious allusion to the West and East rivalries of the actual Cold War, but was toned down due to factors occurring outside of Doctor Who, which I'll come to later. In amongst these Cold War themes, you have traitors Nielsen and Solo secretly attempting to sabotage the sea base, as well as the Silurians and Sea Devils referring to each other as comrades. Regarding the narrative structure, Johnny Byrne opts for the tried and tested base under siege scenario, which had featured heavily in the show's history, in particular during the Patrick Troughton era. However, the base under siege setup had only really been used in the Fifth Doctor era with Earthshock, which I always found myself making comparisons to when watching Warriors of the Deep. Although I wouldn't expect Johnny Byrne to write a replica of Earthshock, the subtle differences go a long way to highlight the depth and quality between the two stories. One of the main advantages Earthshock had in its storytelling was its shock value in regards to the timing of the Cybermen's revelation and the Doctor's later realisation. Unfortunately, Warriors of the Deep doesn't hold that shock value, with the Silurians first showing up in the opening 5 minutes of the show, and the Doctor instantly recognising their involvement when recognising the Silurian battlecruiser. In all, the story doesn't pull off many surprises and shocks, although I'm not sure a shock reveal of the Silurians or Sea Devils would have carried the same weight as the Cybermen did in Earthshock, given the amount of time since the Sea Devils and Silurians' last appearance, which was 12 and 14 years respectively, and not carrying as much antagonist weight as the Cybermen. Warriors of the Deep was directed by Pennant Roberts, who has the honour of being the only person to have directed before and during the John Nathan Turner produced era of Doctor Who. A troubled production from the start, Roberts, like many directors, often preferred to use actors that he had worked with previously to help ease through the production. In this case, experienced actors Ian McCulloch playing Nielsen and Ingrid Pitt, who played Solo. Although Ingrid Pitt, who had previously appeared in the third Doctor story The Time Monster, seems to overplay her part with some embarrassing scenes in the story. I earlier alluded to situations outside the show bearing an influence on the quality and end product of Warriors of the Deep, with that being in late 1983, when the story was recorded, Margaret Thatcher called a snap election. Due to this, the BBC had to quickly prioritise studio time for election shows, curtailing the amount of preparation and recording time that had originally been allotted for Warriors of the Deep. At one point, John Nathan Turner was given an option of ditching the story altogether in order to focus on the remaining stories of the season. The reduction in preparation and recording is clearly seen throughout the story, with less time to rehearse the scenes having a knock-on effect in the actual performances. On top of this, the reduction in recording time meant less opportunities for retakes, which were already known for being limited on Doctor Who. Additionally, the execution and portrayal of the Merker suffered, which was an already tricky and risky prop design being hurriedly finished to the point with the paint still being wet and noticeably rubbing off on the set, and the glue not having set at all, which the actors inside the costume took notice due to the wearing the outfit being comparative to sniffing glue. As for the actors behind the Merker themselves, they were given roughly an hour to get established with the prop before starting to shoot with the outfit clearly not suitably fitting them. The set design for Warriors of the Deep to me is an interesting concept. On the face value it is attractive with its bright white layout and high ceiling making it feel rather large, spacious and expansive. However, it isn't right for the scenario, and what writer Johnny Byrne had in mind was a more run-down, dark, shadowy and claustrophobic look. I have to agree this would have been more effective given how well it worked in stories such as Earthshock, which gave the story more intensity. This would have complemented other factors such as the Merker in that manner the less you saw the more effective it would be. In total, the set designs look good, but don't seem to fit the representation of the narrative. This idea could have also been applied to the costume design, in particular with the crew of the sea base. Predicting the look of future in film and TV can be difficult, as you're operating from a blank canvas, and a lot of your influences are based on the trends of the time, and as a piece of fiction ages over time, the look which may have seemed suitable immediately comes dated. With the crew of the sea base, they are fitted in colourful looking tracksuits, and both men and women have subtle eye makeup reminiscent of the new romantic age of the 1980s pop music scene. The problem I have is the designs don't fit in with the practicality of the crew's role, even for something that is set in the late 21st century. The sea base is a top secret facility that is armed and capable of destruction, and the crew are essentially military personnel akin to what we'd recognise as the Navy, and the real-life equivalent of the sea base would be a submarine or a frigate. Therefore, what would have maybe been more apt was a more singular piece of practical-looking uniform, and then their isolation and available amenities meant that the makeup isn't practical or necessary. Warriors of the Deep was broadcasted as 4 episodes from the 5th to the 13th of January 1984 as the opener of season 21. This was a season of change, and during the recording of this story, Peter Davidson and Janet Fielding announced their intention to leave, with Turlough actor Mark Strickson also announcing his departure soon after. By the end of the season, all the main cast featured in Warriors of the Deep had been replaced, and a new era of the show was set to emerge. Whilst watching Warriors of the Deep, I couldn't help thinking to myself what this could have been. The Silurians and the Sea Devils had both well-received popular debut stories from the Jon Pertwee era, and the decision to bring them back was a great idea, if not overdue. A season opening story either needs to be great or memorable for the right reasons. Not necessarily the best of the season, but one to get it off on a positive footing and to grab the audience's attention. The Jon Pertwee and Tom Baker eras often benefited from this idea, but viewing Warriors of the Deep as a season opener back in 1984, and imagine you as the audience would feel somewhat deflated. Better stories did follow, but on the whole, I feel season 21 is Peter Davison's weakest. To be fair, Johnny Byrne's script isn't the worst, but by the same token, it isn't the strongest either, and it lacks the structure for any kind of suspense or shock treatment, which reflects in the lukewarm cliffhangers of all the episodes. Yes, the outside influences affecting the production and recording of the story didn't help either, but what it did do is expose the limitations and poor visualization ideas of the story. The story for me needed to be claustrophobic and eerie, with using the Silurians and Sea Devils more effectively, and this could have happened with adopting Johnny Byrne's vision more and tweaking the script somewhat. I'm not saying it would have gone down as an all-time great, but it would certainly have gathered a better reputation than what it does have now. Warriors of the Deep has gathered notoriety of how not to make a Doctor Who story, and when the case was made at the end of season 22 to put the show on hiatus, a set of clips was presented to the BBC executives to support this argument, including clips from Warriors of the Deep. One scene in particular is Ingrid Pitt's character's martial arts efforts when trying to tackle the dreaded Merca. The closing line ironically sums up the general feel of Warriors of the Deep. There should have been another way. So, that concludes my review on Warriors of the Deep. Of course, it is only my opinion, so feel free to express your own in the comments if you think differently. Be sure to tune in for my next video, but if you do have a suggestion for a story for me to review, then just let me know. But remember, it's the end that the moment has been prepared for.